Hello, beloveds, and welcome. My name is Elaine Kalila Sophia, and I am here as gatekeeper and vocalizer for the Priestess Presence Temple. And we are in the second offering of the Foundation series. We're in Foundation Part 2, where we are going to be delving into the world of alchemy. I'm really excited to share this with you. You know, I first came across the word alchemy about 25 years ago when I was deep in the study of Jung's alchemical texts and really fascinated by this whole process of spiritual evolution through turning the lead of our own being into the gold of our essence, or the gold of our spiritual selves. And it captured my imagination, and I began to see throughout history, throughout the stories, the mythology, the great myths and legends of our world, how this quest for the reclamation of the lost parts of ourselves and the cohesion and transmutation of our shadow into the light of who we are as spiritualized or realized beings was really compelling. And so I began to see it reflected in the story of the ugly duckling, where the ugly duckling is convinced, right, that she doesn't fit in, and that at some point a transfiguration, a transmutation happens, and the ugly duckling discovers the swan within. I found it fascinating, the analogy of the lump of coal that becomes over time the diamond, or the grain of sand in the oyster shell that becomes the pearl. And embedded in these stories, mythologies, and processes is a deep and profound quest that we as human beings are on, for the search, the deep internal search for our true essence. And so I am offering this deepening into the world of alchemy, because alchemy is at the center of the 13 Moon Mystery School lineage. It's at the center of our priestessing lineage. We are here as alchemists of love. And I want us to deepen into that together, so that as we enter into the Priestess Presence Mysterium, we can truly come from a little more of an integrated standpoint. You know, over my lifetime, I have studied alchemy as a concept, alchemy as a process, but nothing really could prepare me for the power of actually encountering an alchemical field. The field that was held along the tenets, the founding principles of what alchemy actually is. And so in this offering, I want to share with you some of the history of alchemy, some ways to view it, and then some of the principles upon which alchemy is founded. And then we're going to actually share the 7 stages, alchemical stages, so that you can begin to understand those as both physiological and psychological and chemical reactions that occur within us, but truly occur within all things on this planet. This planet is alchemical by nature. So I'm really honored. I am drawing from a number of different sources. I've already named Jung and his alchemical studies. In particular, the Red Book is one that I have been immersed in for a number of years. I'm also drawing from the Emerald Tablet and this beautiful book here, Alchemy for Personal Transformation by Dennis William Hauck. This book right here, you can see that there. And that, if anybody wants to deepen into the field of alchemy, is my best suggestion for you as a reading. And I'm also drawing from, of course, the 13 Moon Oracle by Ariel Spilsbury, which really holds the deeper mystery teachings of this lineage. So with that said, let us dive in to the world of alchemy. Enjoy being immersed, and may this serve us all in creating a conceptual framework that will help us to enter into the alchemical experience of being in temple together and give a sense, a mapping, if you will, of the experience. Okay. What is alchemy? Well, alchemy is simply the raising of frequency. It describes the process of transmutation of baser elements into gold. Essentially, alchemy is what happens when we bring two elements together and they are changed by the presence of each other. So if you want to even think about it like two people coming into a room, each one of them bringing a specific frequency and each one being changed by the presence of the other, so that we are changed by the encounter at some chemical level in our bodies, in our viscera, right? We are affected by each other. And that essentially is what alchemy is. From a very simple physical viewpoint, our bodies are the alchemical laboratories where in the alchemy of transforming food into energy occurs, right? When we digest food, we alchemize it. We bring the different chemical energies together with different enzymes and different digestive elements within our body, and we convert it into energy, which is really amazing. So by analogy, we're also alchemical consciousnesses, and pause. By analogy, we are also alchemical consciousness laboratories. And so understanding the nature of alchemy can assist us in the rapid transit and transmutation of our consciousness. So basically, when we talk about alchemy, we're talking about the process whereby one thing is changed into another. Baser elements changed into gold. And so when we enter into the world of alchemy, we're entering into one of the most interesting, illuminating, and compelling processes whereby we are able to transmute ourselves. So I'm sharing this image with you right at the beginning here. This is an alchemical image, and it's known as the Ouroboros. Now, the Ouroboros, what a beautiful image. Can you just look at it for a moment? Because this, if there is one symbol that sums up the alchemical process, this is it. Now, the thinking mind may not be able to grok this, so I'm going to encourage you to drop out of the thinking mind and just see it as a symbol and see what you see. As you see the never-ending cycle here, you see one being eating the other being in a never-ending loop. And on an alchemical symbolic level, what this is speaking to is the never-ending cycle of the great work. The Ouroboros was used by the alchemists to be a symbol of the great work. It actually originates in ancient Egypt and entered into the Western tradition via the Greek magical tradition and was adopted as a symbol in both Gnosticism and Hermeticism, and most notably in alchemy. We're going to be talking about both Gnosticism and Hermeticism in just a moment. So this symbol of the Ouroboros is often meant as a form of introspection. It's the eternal return. It symbolizes the cycle of life, this sense of the infinite nature of our endless cycle of life through from creation to destruction to creation yet again. And it speaks to the nature of the great work itself. So the great work itself involves us being in a never-ending cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. And if you could think about that for a moment as being the most seminal archetypal story that we hold, not just in our lives from the moment we are born to the moment we die, but we are born and die so many times within this lifetime, right? That is the nature of our everyday existence. We die to certain ages, we die to certain experiences, and the more proficient that we become at embodying this cycle of life within our lifespan, the alchemists would say that this process is one that distills the essence of who we are. So the essence of who we are is revealed every time that we are reborn through this cycle. Hail and welcome to the Ouroboros. So we've discerned that alchemy is a process whereby we are transforming one thing into something else, right? We are transforming ourselves, some aspect of ourselves, be it a shadow emotion, say jealousy. We are transforming jealousy into unconditional acceptance. Okay, that's one way that we might see it. We are transmuting feelings of unworthiness into feelings of innate value. We are transmuting the feelings of being isolated into the knowing of our innate connection to all things. This is at the heart of alchemy, moving from one state to another. In the first foundational offering, I was speaking about how the healing nature of theater and the healing nature of performance is innately alchemical. For when a piece of theater is offered, or a piece of ceremonial work is offered in service to the collective, truly what it's offering is a rite of passage. It's an opportunity for us to enter in as one thing, to dissolve who it was that we were and to emerge as something else. The most classic image of that is the caterpillar who goes into the chrysalis and emerges as the butterfly. That's the most seminal image that we have for alchemy within nature, right? This caterpillar is completely changed through that experience. And alchemy speaks to that level of transmutation where we do not resemble who we were when we entered in. And so this liminal space, this space where we get to come undone, where we get to be changed beyond all recognition, well, there are certain conditions that are necessary for that to take place. And the Priestess Presence Online Mysterium, for example, is a beautiful example of an alchemical space. It's expressly designed for us to come together and be changed, be transmuted, to not be the same being that walks in the doors as the being that will leave at the end. So in order for alchemy to be successful, whether it's in the physical world, the spiritual world, the psychological world, wherever we are alchemizing, the first thing is that there must be a crucible or a container in which the alchemical reactions can occur. So in this instance, in our work, the container is the temple. The container is the set of sacred agreements that we'll come into as we enter temple. The container is our presence and our energetic holding of a journey. And the degree to which we can hold that container as a coherent space. In other words, we can hold it inside the agreement field and not bring in outside contaminants that would disturb that field, is the degree to which we can then potentize the alchemy that can take place inside. I want you to think about, if you bring two chemical elements together, you have to create a conditional environment for them to be in. You must contain them in the integrity of those two elements and not introduce any other elements in order for the alchemy of those two elements to remain pristine. The same is true for our work. That's why we create a time and space for it. It's why we have a beginning and a middle and an end. It's why we have certain rituals that help us to navigate the alchemical space. So the second necessary condition for alchemy to take place is that there must be an element, a pattern, a belief, a shadow, an old story, a wound, which is to be alchemically transformed. So you must be bringing something. That would be the element that you're bringing in to be alchemized, right? So there's something that you're intending consciously to bring into this container. So for example, into the Mysterium, we are all bringing some of the most potent wounds that we've experienced through the lens of the goddess of love. And that is the offering that we're bringing, the wounds or the separation, the places where we felt lost or disconnected, the places where we know that there is something that we need to reclaim. And then thirdly, there is the energy needed to fuel the alchemical reaction. And in the case of our work, that energy is our consciousness, our hearts, and ultimately the Shakti that we work to actually raise inside the alchemical crucible in order to transmute, to melt, to dissolve, to break apart old forms of our own being that no longer serve us. So alchemy can seem complex, but it's actually pretty simple, really. It is just the ability for us to be able to stay inside a container long enough for the outcome to be obtained. And that's why we set a field of alchemy together to do the work. Because without the container, without the consciousness, without the Shakti, there is no alchemy. Or at least alchemy is not happening within a conscious environment. We should say that alchemy is happening all the time. But if you want to have it used for conscious means, in other words, to raise the vibration of the places where you don't love yourself, to infusing those places with unconditional love, which is an alchemical act, then you need a space in which to do it. And that's what makes this work so powerful. So the circle that we're in has a clear intention to be the alchemical container, and it's the crucible or the flask. The patterns or resistances to love and pure awareness are that which is being transformed, and finally, the energy needed to fuel this reaction is archetypally and self-generated awareness for the purpose of soul evolution. Our Shakti, our heart, used in the purpose of our evolution. So that's the conditions that are necessary for alchemy to take place. So I want to take us back in history a little bit here, because what I found to be fascinating when I started to deepen my own research was that the first documented alchemist is indeed a female. And she was known as Mary the Jewess or Miriam the Prophetess. She goes by many, many different names. And what we know about her is that she existed somewhere between the 1st century AD and the 4th century AD. It's contentious as to when she existed, but she is cited in many different places. And she is cited as being the source of these two principles. Out of the one comes two. Out of two comes three. And from the third comes the one as the fourth. Now, this is an axiom of alchemy that is repeated everywhere. It's essentially the Vesica Pisces. It's that one and one becomes two. And as two overlap, they create the third. And from the third comes the one. So essentially what it's saying is that as we combine together two separate elements, if we think about it in very basic terms, of the male and the female, bring the female and the male together in sacred union, out of that union, a sacred third is born that's called the relationship. And the relationship exists as a separate entity to the original two individual elements, if that makes sense. That sacred third is the outcome of the alchemical union of the two separate elements. And so within our psyche, what we know is alchemy is based on the ability to hold two polarities. So the polarity of love and hate, for example, very basic polarity there. Our ability to hold both love and hate in the alchemical vessel of our own being. In other words, holding the capacity that we have to both love and hate as being the possibilities that we could live into, and bringing those together and loving the part of us that would hate and bringing it into the field of that love, we start to close the gap between love and hate. And we birth something out of that union that is in a form of understanding and acceptance of all things in us as humans, that we all have this capacity. And as we love it within ourselves, we become able to love it in another. That is at the heart of alchemy. We'll get into that in just a little bit. So she also is known to have said, join the male and the female and you will find what is sought. In other words, bring the male and female inside of you together and something else will be born. What Jung called the anima and animus, bringing together of the internal masculine and feminine in a sacred marriage, is at the core of the alchemical process. And we'll be talking about that in just a second. Another famous alchemist that I particularly like was Paracelsus. Now, Paracelsus was around in the 1500s. He was a very well-known, not very well-liked doctor, but he was the modern father of toxicology, and he was really quite an extraordinary man. And he's well known for understanding that poison is in everything and no thing is without poison. The dosage makes it either a poison or a remedy, which is at the heart of alchemy also, which is the sense that within the wound, within the toxicity, lives the healing, lives the remedy. In other words, within the wound lives the healing. All things are concealed in one. In other words, there is only one here, and we need to look to the oneness, and we need to look to the fact that the poison is the very thing that we think destroys, but within the poison is the healing. And so there you go, there's that polarity once again, right? The heart of alchemy, bringing two polar opposites together and creating something else out of them. Such a beautiful axiom. So we can't really speak about alchemy, especially from the Western tradition, without referencing the emerald tablet. Now, you're seeing a reproduction of the emerald tablet on the left-hand side of your screen there, that beautiful green glass-looking document. And the emerald tablet is one of the most revered documents in the Western world, and it is said to have been authored by a being called Hermes Trismegistus, and has become synonymous with ancient wisdom, the ancient wisdom of the Western traditions. Now, what you're seeing on the screen here is the Greek god Hermes there with the wings on his feet, and then next to him in the middle of the screen is the Egyptian god Thoth. And Hermes Trismegistus was a character, a archetype, a god throughout history who has been sort of seen multiculturally across different cultures. So in the Egyptians, he was portrayed here as a moon god with the body of a man that you're seeing there, and the head of an ibis and a crescent moon over his head. And his symbol was the winged serpent staff that he would carry. And he was the god of wisdom, letters, and time. But he was not only known to the Egyptians, he was also known to the Sumerians, and he may well have been Enoch to the Jews, Odin to the Scandinavians, Wotan to the Teutons, and some even suggest Buddha. Before he was revered as a god, he was the first ever Egyptian philosopher and founder of ancient mystery schools, receiving his wisdom from internal meditative trances, and is said to have written over 40 books, including allegedly the Emerald Tablet, the Book of Thoth, and the Divine Pymander. So the topics that he covered in these beautiful offerings, these deep mystery school offerings, were wide. They ranged from medicine to chemistry to law to art, music, magic, philosophy, geography, mathematics, and anatomy. And to the Egyptians, his knowledge was so vast and all-encompassing that they first began to credit him as the communicator with the gods, eventually inducting him to be into the Egyptian pantheon. And that's why he became Hermes in the Greek rendition. So Hermes Trismegistus, thrice majestic, is a powerful figure. And he is allegedly the author of the Emerald Tablet. We don't know that for sure because there is no actual evidence of that, but it is said throughout history that he was the one that actually penned this document. So this tablet, well, what is it? It is an extremely succinct summary of a timeless science of the soul that keeps popping up across the world despite centuries of efforts to suppress it. Now, the basic idea of the Emerald Tablet is that there exists a divine or archetypal level of mind that determines physical reality, and individuals can access that realm through direct knowledge of God. So what I'm reading from right here to you and sharing with you is from the Emerald Tablet, which is a commentary on the Emerald Tablet, I should say. Alchemy for Personal Transformation, written by Dennis William Huck. And this is an amazing offering and book. And I'm going to share some of his words here, as he really offers some of the most succinct modern translation of what the Emerald Tablet really holds for us. So he says, the teachers of Hermes, the Hermetic tradition, is one of the oldest spiritual traditions in the world. And while no direct evidence links the Emerald Tablet to Eastern religion, it also shares uncanny similarities in concepts and terminology with Taoism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. In the West, the tablet found a home not only in the pagan tradition, but also in all three of the orthodox Abrahamic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And many of the most heretical beliefs of the Gnostics are also openly expressed within it. Like the authors of the tablet, the Gnostics believed that the direct knowledge of reality could be attained through psychological discipline and meditative exercises. They also shared a common view of the universe in which all is one, a pattern of creation and decay symbolized by the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, which was the symbol that I shared with you right at the beginning of this offering. Without doubt, the Emerald Temple was the inspiration behind many other esoteric traditions, including over 1,700 years of alchemy. Most medieval alchemists hung a copy of the tablet on their laboratory wall and constantly referred to the secret formula it contained. In fact, during the 16th century, Hermes Trismegistus was such a revered figure that there was a movement to have his teachings replace those of Aristotle in the European schools. 500 years later, the tablet's words are still held in the highest regard. The Emerald Tablet is the cryptic epitome of the alchemical opus, noted Jungian analyst Dr. Edward Edinger, a recipe for the second creation of the world. Ethnobotanist and consciousness guru Terence McKenna agrees, calling the tablet a formula for a holographic matrix that is mirrored in the human mind and offers mankind its only hope for future survival. There is no getting away from the fact that the Emerald Temple is one of the most profound and important documents to have come down to us. It has been said more than once that it contains the sum of all knowledge for those able to understand it. So, that is an excerpt from the Emerald Tablet, and I'm going to share one other piece that I feel is really elucidating and really useful in the understanding of what alchemy really is. So the alchemists attempted to perfect the one thing of Hermes, what they called the first matter, by using specific physical, psychological, and spiritual techniques that they described in chemical terms and demonstrated in laboratory experiments. However, while the alchemist philosophers spoke in terms of chemicals, furnaces, flasks, and beakers, they were really talking about the changes taking place within their own bodies, minds, and souls. Though in their public writings, the alchemists always scrambled the order of the steps of transformation, the Emerald Tablet presents them in their original order. The tablet, which seemed to contain a recipe for the perfection of anything, was a cookbook that guided the alchemists through their experiments. As the first chemists, the alchemists believed they could harness the forces described in the tablet and actually transmute lead into gold in their laboratories. But there was one big difference between the alchemists and the modern chemists. The alchemists believed that their own state of consciousness would somehow affect the final outcome of their experiments, that the purity of their own souls was a factor in perfecting the metals. For that reason, they worked as much on themselves as they did with their chemicals. As the first psychologists, the alchemists identified a mixture of 7 metals or mental traits that were responsible for an individual's temperament. The transmutation of these base metals into gold was the perfection of their personalities, and as mystics, they meditated frequently, exposing their very souls to the processes of alchemy. Actually, the alchemists always had two laboratories in which they worked. One was the laboratory of beakers and smelly chemicals in which they sought physical perfection. The other was an inner laboratory, a quiet place. The alchemist created within himself a place of no confusion where the work could proceed on his soul. So alchemy was never just an intellectual exercise or an artificial discipline. Alchemists were intimately involved in their experiments and believed their thoughts and feelings were actual forces that could result and influence the results. It was a view of the power of consciousness, the crucial relationship between observer and experiment, which some quantum physicists have only just recently accepted. However, unlike the scientists who developed the atomic bomb, the alchemists never shared their secret formulae with anyone outside their own discipline. The alchemists never made the mistake of trusting their country's rulers or military powers or even religious leaders. They invented cryptic symbols and used coded phrases to conceal their knowledge from others, which is why so many of those who sought to unlock their secrets walked away in frustration. The emerald tablet is a Rosetta Stone for deciphering the alchemist's secret manuscripts. Their entire art was based on the principles it contained, and they followed the operations it described with religious zeal. In fact, in the so-called Grail layouts of the Emerald Tablet, in which the words were arranged into the shape of a chalice, the place where one grasps the holy chalice contains all 7 steps. These 7 operations are truly at the heart of both the tablet and the discipline of alchemy. So, that is taken from the Emerald Tablet, and it was pages 151 through 52. So that's what we're seeing here, is that this Hermetic science underlies all of the Western esoteric and probably the Eastern esoteric mystery schools, philosophies, maps and blueprints of how we as human beings actually go through a process of transformation through our lives and how we awaken to the divine within us. And so these schools of thought are really underlying all of our work within the mystery school, within the 13 moon mystery school lineage, within our priestess present lineages, and really forming for us a guideline. And so this is what we are speaking of when we speak of alchemy, embedded in the Emerald Tablet are the 7 Hermetic principles, and I have listed them here for you to read through and to contemplate. But these 7 principles are completely embedded within the 13 Moon Mystery School lineage and within the Priestess Presence Temple. They form the basis of most Western mystery schools, and in fact, most Eastern mystery schools too. So the principle of mentalism, all is mind, the universe is mental. In other words, you cannot separate out the mind from the universe. We are thinking mind. When we are in high mind, we are in the principle of the universal mind. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, as below, so above. In other words, there is always a corresponding element. If something is happening down here on earth, there is a corresponding element happening in the etheric plane and vice versa. And in that way, we live in a holographic universe where we are expressions of above and above is expressions of below. There is no separation here. As above, so below. The principle of vibration. Nothing rests, everything moves, everything vibrates. So even when something appears solid, it is not. We know that now from quantum physics, that we are made of 99% space and that we are vibrating and constantly moving even when we appear still. In the stillness is movement, and in the movement is stillness. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet all truths. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet. All half truths are but half truths. The principle of polarity. Everything is dual. Everything has poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. So this is exactly what we've been speaking to in alchemy. There has to be two elements that are polar difference, polar opposites to be reconciled, the light and the shadow to be reconciled within us, right? The polarity of being divine and human, of male and female, of joy and sadness, everything. If we travel along the line that separates them, becomes the same thing in the end. If we imagine a straight line, we know that in the end, a straight line becomes a circle. We know that. So if on a straight line, at either end of the line, you place joy and grief, and then you follow that line to its conclusion as it becomes a circle, you discover that joy and grief live side by side. They are two sides of the same coin. In order for joy to exist, grief must exist. And when we reconcile both joy and grief, we enter into freedom. We enter into the divine humanity of knowing that joy and grief are but places along the road on the way to one another. The principle of rhythm. Everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All things rise and fall. The pendulum swing manifests in everything, and the measure of the swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. Rhythm compensates. Everything flows in and out. Our menses, the moon tides, our lives. Everything has its season. Everything is born and everything dies. There is a rhythm to our lives. There is a rhythm to our breath, the in-breath and the out-breath. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to the law. Chance is but a name for pause. The principle of cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. So we may not be able to see the cause and effect, and we may only see it in the terms of synchronicity, which seems acausal, but somewhere in the great plan of things, there is a reaction and a response, a cause and an effect. The principle of gender. Gender isn't everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. And gender, in the broadest sense of the word, energy. There is masculine and feminine energy present in everything on this planet, in this realm. Everything has a masculine pole and a feminine pole expressed in different traits or different archetypal resonances of the masculine and feminine. So these are the 7 hermetic principles that underlie the Emerald Tablet, that underlie the principles of alchemy. And so what I'd love to share with you now, as we begin to deepen inside of this beautiful, very illuminating field, is to actually speak into the alchemical process itself. And this is the 7 phases of alchemy that are based upon the 7 phases of those alchemical principles as embedded in the Hermetic tradition, and really speak to the way in which transmutation happens in an organic way. When we bring our consciousness to our own soul's evolution, we begin to heighten an organic process. We begin to bring consciousness to the process, and therefore we begin to rocket fuel the process. That is the nature of our soul's individuation. When we start to engage in our own healing and holding process, like inside the Mysterium, we are adding fuel to the alchemical fire. And that way we are actually really stepping onto a journey of initiation. So as you come into the Mysterium, you will be experiencing an alchemical field. And what I want to speak to you about now are the 7 phases, so that you have a blueprint for what alchemy actually is and what it feels like. So, step 1 in alchemy is calcination. It's entering into the nigredo. It's the process that represents the burning off of the dross of our personality to reveal the soul. Can be, not always, but can be a painful process in which the ego mind and its attachments and all our defense mechanisms are eliminated to free us up from self-deception. Okay, so this is the process where we get to look at those patterns that we don't want to look at. It's the process where we enter into the shadow and we start to reclaim from the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious aspects of ourselves that we have split off. Psychologically speaking, this is the place where we really get to face into the ego and the ways in which we have been attached to our identity, to our material possessions, to who it is that we think we are. It's a pretty humbling process to go into the dark. And we are usually asked in this space to surrender to the dark, to surrender to the place of introspection and self-evaluation. It's the place where we get to look at the parts that we haven't wanted to look at, and it's humbling and ultimately freeing. But as we go into the black, into the nigredo, we meet the place where we have to say, I surrender to receive. I have to now let go of who it was that I thought I was and see who is in here. It's the turning within. It's the removal of our incessant looking outside of ourselves for the answer, to realizing that there's a deep calling from within, from our deep soul being that's lurking there in the dark, waiting for us. And it's time to turn around and see her. And then the images that you're seeing connected to each one of these stages are the original alchemical images that held the information of these different phases. And these images are ones that I have found that are the heating of that vessel, the calcination beginning, the dissolution, the burning away of the ego, the personality, the shtick, if you like, the stories we tell, the identity that we've been living in. It's that entering into the chrysalis. It's the phase where we begin to become that the goo, where the caterpillar begins to dissolve into the imaginal cells. This is the beginning of the calcination process. Okay, so step 2 is called dissolution. And here we immerse into the waters of the unconscious. Dissolution is the process that works on the heart and subconscious to release buried emotions that conceal or distort our true nature. To expose the soul requires letting go of control and breaking of habits. And so in this place, we find ourselves dissolving into the unconscious. We break down the structures of the psyche by immersing ourselves within the waters of the unconscious. And within this form, we start to have access to parts of ourselves that have been hidden until now. They come to us in dreams and images and poetry, through our journaling, through synchronicity, through others who show up in our lives. We start to see parts of ourselves that we have not wanted to claim for whatever reason, because we were ashamed or we felt ourselves unworthy. And the dissolution begins to allow these processes, these archetypal energies, these aspects of self to begin to emerge out of the great waters of our unconscious, both the collective and the personal. It's the place where our conscious mind has to let go of control so that the buried material, the gems of who we are truly, can begin to rise up to the surface. And so here's a couple of other images that hold the energy of that dissolution, that surrender, that letting go into the water. Water as an agent that dissolves, right? That breaks apart through the dissolution. When something goes into water, it becomes permeable. If you think about how water affects the landscape of the world and how water is highly, highly conductive, carrying all the messages through the water, all of our unconscious material through the waters to us. So step 3, separation. And this is known as the phase where we see through the dross. So in the operation of separation involves extraction of material from the alchemical solution through heating and filtrating and sifting. And psychologically, it represents the development of an objective witness that sees all the petty tricks the ego has used to maintain power. How humbling is that? This is the phase where we literally feel ourselves being heated up. And through that heating process, there is a distillation that takes place. Some of the dross is literally burned away. And we begin to see through our own behaviors, right? We see through the patterns, we see through the stories, we see through the games that we've been playing to try to get love or to be accepted or to be somehow, to be not just loved and accepted, but to be successful or to be a person of notoriety or whatever it is we think we need to be in order to be okay. We start to see through that, and the objective witness is born within us, the part of us that's able to see the bigger picture and who can see through eyes of neutrality. It's the essence within us that can look at all of our human shenanigans and see it through the eyes of love. But we begin to see that we are not the story. We separate out from the story and we realize that we're much, much more than the story that we've been telling. So psychologically, this is the state where we really go into an expanded state, right? We are able to begin to see ourselves as bigger, as more expanded than the small self. And we have some choices in this space to see through to a different possibility of who we could actually be. And so here's that image of seeing yourself clearly in that mirror, being reflected back, the witness, looking in her own eyes, seeing through the drama and the shenanigans and the play acting and the places where the stories of not enoughness and too muchness have lived, and seeing what's real. So there's a capacity here in this process of the alchemy that you're going to notice in yourself as you go through it, where you're going to see yourself clearly and from a place of neutrality, and a place where you do not judge, but you see clearly. And you decide in that moment that you no longer wish to participate in that particular drama. Then we go through to step 4, which is conjunction, which once we've seen through the dross, we have some choices about what we want to bring through into a new reality. And in this phase, there's a birthing of a new reality through the grounded union of being and action, male and female aspects of the self. Conjunction gives the equanimity necessary to carry on with the higher operations of alchemy. So when we come into conjunction, it's the empowerment of our true self. It's the union of both the masculine and the feminine. As you see this idea of the male and female coming together, and out of that something new being born within us. It's the union of our personalities into a new belief system or an intuitive state of consciousness. And so this is what the alchemists used to refer to as the lesser stone. It's the place along the journey where we birth a new form of ourselves, which actually grants us access into a higher octave of our own being. It's like we've arrived at a certain level of union where we can now see that we can have different choices. We are sovereign in those choices, and we have the ability to act in the world in a new way. And that's a very powerful place to be, right? This birthing of a new reality within us. And we are able at this point to be envisioning a new life, a new way of being, a new story to live within. And then we reach to step 5. Oh, here we go. This is the beautiful marriage, the Shiva Shakti marriage right here. This is the Heros Gamas, the sacred union of the male and female within, out of which is born a sacred third that is neither and all. And that process is deeply embedded within alchemical healing, transmutationally speaking. And so there's lots of images you're going to see of this union here. I think there's some more I'm sharing. Yeah, another symbol of union, the male and the female, and then the united essence flowing out of the center of that beautiful rose, that golden elixir into the chalice of oneness, that is neither one nor the other, but is a union of both as a sacred third. Again, that's another beautiful image of sacred union. So, once we've reached that phase, we then can go into what they call the higher alchemy, which is step number 5, fermentation. And this stage can come as a surprise because you just had a birth, right? We arrived somewhere. The Heros Gamas happened, and we felt that we had birthed a new reality. And then we go into the dark night of the soul. And so in spiritual terms, this is the process where we reach a point where we have had enough and we finally have to surrender to the outside forces. And it can come in the form of a death, a betrayal, a major illness, or some other situation in life, some other kind of initiation that just brings us to our knees. You know, for me, in my own journey, I've had many of these, but the one that was really connected into the Priestess Presence Temple and was a huge fermentation, dark night of the soul, was when I got pregnant at the age of 46 and then had a miscarriage. And it was out of that miscarriage that the Priestess Presence Temple was actually birthed. And so that was a very alchemical experience where, something happened in my life, an initiation, a powerful dark night of the soul occurred. And I know as I'm speaking to you, you've all had your own dark nights of the soul. And when we go through one of those, we have to finally surrender. There's no way to not surrender. We're brought to our knees. And so when we go through the alchemical process, usually there's a moment in our alchemical journey where we have to just get on our knees in humility and say, I don't know. I cannot do this any longer. And that's that place. It's a powerful, powerful place in the journey. And it's one that most of us want to avoid because it can be painful and very confronting, but at the same time, inherently liberating. And so here's some images that encapsulate that dark night of the soul, and we've all had this experience. And what alchemy does is gives us a framework to understand it. It's like a map to understand the process, that it's not a state that we stay in forever. It's a stage on the way to another stage. And that is the power of understanding alchemy, is that there is phases that we will go through over and over again. And as the Ouroboros tells us, we will never be done. But we will continue to refine and refine and refine as we travel through this life. So then step 6 is distillation, the purification of the unborn self. So distillation is the reduction to the essence, wherein only that which cannot be dissolved remains. This often manifests as a kundalini awakening, a near-death or samadhi experience, or emerging with the divine. This is where we meet the divine within us, the essence being that which cannot be reduced, the eternal essence of us that beyond all personality, all ego, beyond all identity, There exists an essence within every single one of us. And in this moment, at this step of the alchemy, we get to experience that essence. We get to be in the presence of our own essence. It awakens within us this incredible space where we get to feel the divine human being born within us. And then here we are, some beautiful images. This is an Alex Gray image of the Sophia. Just receive that energy, the essence being born within us. Another beautiful image that shows that awakening, that kundalini rising through the heart up to the crown. And then we reach the final step, coagulation. It's the process wherein the body is made spiritual and the spirit is made corporal. This is the final step of the divine human. Coagulation is the result of the union of spirit and matter. The alchemical principle solve e coagula, dissolve and coagulate, break down and resynthesize in a higher order of being, summarizes the entire alchemical process. And here we become born within this divine human. We become refined, and the small story that we had been telling up until now is no longer real. This is the place of ecstasis divinitas, of divine intoxication. It is the place where we come to know ourselves as a different being. It's the place where we exit the alchemical container changed. We are not who we became. We become the butterfly. And so that process of caterpillar to alchemical soup to butterfly happens over and over and over again. And here are two beautiful images to share with you of that process of awakening, of becoming divine humans, goddesses incarnate. Awakening the car body, awakening to our divine essence as she lives within us, and being able to access that more and more fully within our human capacity. That merging and union of the marriage between the divine and the human, between spirit and matter. Images that hold 1,000 words. So, in this process of alchemy within the 13 Moon Mystery tradition, the elixir, the primary elixir, is unconditional love. And the axiom of which we travel for this entire journey, beloveds, is I love my shadow as I love my light, for all things are transformed in the elixir of unconditional love. This is what it means to become an alchemist of love, to become one who is willing to love all of the unlovable things within self, knowing that as you do that, you transmute them into the light and free yourself. You are liberated. And you are vibrationally altered through that experience as you become more and more able to move from a place of unconditional love. And so that is this story. These are some of the sources of the material that I've shared with you. Please know that this journey is not conceptual, and that what you'll bring with you into the Mysterium is this knowledge of those 7 principles and those 7 phases, but you will experience them from a place of no mind as they happen alchemically within your physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual body. The process of dissolution and coagulation and fermentation all happen within all of our bodies at all levels at all dimensions. And so this is a map so that you may reflect through the journey where you may be in the alchemical soup from the moment of entering to the moment of leaving. What a blessing to be on this journey with you.